updates on the hotspot projects. And who is presenting that?
Okay.
Julie, go ahead. Floor is yours.
So I understand that the paper is taken as read, and that if you have any questions, that I'm here to answer them. Is that the formality?
For questions.
Well, so in summary, I can give you a quick summary then. All of the project leads are actively working to deliver their projects, and we've got the two freshwater improvement projects, being Tutera and Whakakei. Tutera started, which is great news. They're going great guns. The governance groups met, the project teams met, and the first deliverable being integrated catchment management plan has started. There's been workshops around that and a timeline being developed to deliver that. Also, we're waiting on the land science to start the FEMPs. So Tutera's going great guns. And then Whakakei, with the regards to Whakakei, we haven't signed the deed yet. That's purely because with the new 2 additional deliverables added to the application, there was a condition, if we wanted to go to stage 2, that we needed all 5 consents. So for us, that was a bit of a shame, because part of our project, which is where our money is tied up, and we can't start that project until we sign the deed, is to work with the community and establish how we're going to design and deliver our deliverables with them. And part of that would be then getting the consents. So we're jumping the gun a bit. We've been told you've got to get those consents, so that's thrown a bit of a spanner in the works. So we've been talking with the community, and they've got a meeting this weekend to discuss in-house how that's going to work for them, and then we're just letting them have that meeting, and then we will discuss next steps with them next week.
Just Chair, on that, are these all publicly notified consents? Or are any of them publicly notified?
So I've been told if I can get all the affected parties' signatures, then they don't need to be notified publicly. So we're just working through that, and we're just, it's put pressure on our timeline.
So what's your level of confidence?
I'll probably know more next week. There's different opinions, but we haven't had the time to go up there to spend with the community and work and through all the detail, because we're all about working with them to deliver this, and that was part of the project. So we had all that money ready to go. So this financial year, it's about $12,000 that we've got just for going up there, working with them, going through all the detail, and answering questions, to getting to how we're going to deliver this with them, so they're on the journey with us. So that was really important to us. So trying to fast track that to getting consent and get their signatures does feel a bit awkward. So we're just trying to figure out how we're going to do that with them. So they're talking in-house first, and then we'll meet after that.
Councillor Dick.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll just be reminded that the 1 million a year...
We're using your microphone, please.
Sorry. The 1 million a year, that's ongoing, and it progresses through into the long-term plan?
Yeah, so for the Whakakei and Tutera projects,
Yes.
Tutera is a 4-year project.
Yes.
Whakakei's 5-year, and we've tied up 200,000 for each of those, for
Right.
those terms.
Okay.
With regards to the remaining 4 hotspots, it's going to be, yes, it's continuing, but what that looks like, we're not sure yet. We're waiting for the integrated catchment management
Right.
view, so we can prioritise what needs to happen and identify specifically those hotspots
Yeah.
and the actions that are required.
Okay. So the only 2 that you can put definite timelines on are...
Tutera and Whakakei.
Yeah, okay. the assumption is that they will be ongoing for quite a number of years. Yeah.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the update, Jolene. Looking at the Tutera update, paragraph 4, am I able to, at some stage to have a meeting with Billy Bruff about what's going on with those integrated catchment management plans, or where he's up to in the process?
Yeah, even a TK would be.
Yeah.
First good first point.
I'd like to just fill it in with a bit more detail as to what the feeling is and stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jolene, great report. I like its brevity, but I'm afraid I'm going to ask for something that may mitigate against that. I'm appreciating the structure of the report and the references to trees planted and fencing completed, etc., which I think is a very useful, if you like, milestone measure. And the first thing, though, I wonder whether there's opportunity to put the desired outcome for a particular project. I can't even imagine what it would be like, but sort of the mission statement for that particular project. For example, for Tutera, it could be the turbidity measure. I don't know, clarity of the water or something like that. But that's a possible if we can add that to that. The other aspect too is given our strong focus on partnerships, attracting revenue, partnerships with other organisations, etc. For example, under the Ahuriri Estuary, we've partnered with the regional council, that's Hauhepa. We've planted 15,000 trees. It's not counted here, and yet council has contributed significantly to the workup of that and put money in the pot. So we need to capture that and put the numbers in there. But it does raise the issue of what's the trigger. For example, if the landowners at the top of the estuary we're working with and we are facilitating them accessing X number of trees or planting those, do we count them or not? I think we should. So it's if you like, some further development of your reporting to make sure we're getting full measure and council's getting recognition for its work.
Great.
And my other request is around the marine hotspot. At the moment, even though we've got a paper today, I'm not getting a clear picture of what the detail is there, what the deliverables are. We've got some broad headings, but I just wonder whether we can have it may be clarified with the paper later on today. But the reporting could actually track that a little better than it currently does.
Yeah, okay, and I think you'll get a lot of that today with their roadmap that they're talking about and what they're trying to achieve, more detail and a bigger picture.
Councillor Barker.
On a completely different track, but something similar. I like the brevity of your report, and I wished I had have said at the meeting that you came along with the presentations, some things, and I'll catch up with them now. I thought that was the most exciting presentation I've seen to a council ever.
Fantastic.
And what I'd like you to do, I know we video these things and put them up on the thing, but it would seem to me that this was a great opportunity for you and your team to go and have a summary of that as a video clip for each of them and put them up on our website. So we didn't have the distractions of poor camera work in here, distractions of questions and all the other things went along. But so we want to talk to you about the council's 6 hotspots, and this one we've got in charge of X, and then switch to them and away they go and give it, and the graphs and the charts are all on that. And now we want to talk about the next one and what we're doing here and the graphs and charts and that. And I just think that on our website would be fantastic. We can then send it out to people to see this is what the regional council's work doing, because you and your team were fired up with enthusiasm, and I have to say to you, you'd gone much further than anybody contemplated we would get to with the Hotspots program. And it just showed the value of giving people an objective and some resources and letting them to get on and make it up themselves, because there's a lot of great energy and effort went to that spectacular result. And I'd just like us to be able to share it in a way which would be with our community, which is easier to get at than what we've done thus far.
Yeah, And we had planned to do that for the next ENS update, the video component of it. So that's great. We'll put it on the website.
So I think generally, I sense people want to share that sentiment, that we want to get that story out, get it out effectively. So can we give a little boost to this, to the communications? You know, I would have thought if that video existed, it would be a better video than what we're presenting at the beginning of our public forums now.
Absolutely.
It would absolutely set the stage. Not that I'm knocking the other one, but you know, you know. But you know, we did come back to you once before. We asked to jumpstart an effort. What we're proposing in our long-term plan is a continuation of this. But look what we've done so far. It would be a terrific lead-in, but it's horse is bolted, I'm afraid.
It was almost, in my view, you could portray this as almost biblical. What was it, Matthew? Who gave the three servants bags of gold, one of them 5. He went and invested and came back with 5 more. Are you with me? That's what this was to me. We'd given someone, something, and they'd made much out of it.
Are there any other comments or questions about this report?
Move the report be received.
I'll just make note of that, in the absence of Councillor Hewitt, Lake Whaituma, I'm sure, was targeted as a hotspot at our last meeting, but seems to have dropped off the market this time round, dropped off the radar this time round.
Yeah, so it's with regards to Lake Whaituma and the Tukituki catchment, that is outside of this project because there was already a project going on with that. So the land management team are working in that space, and where there's more money, more effort and resources already around that, where this is targeted at the Makirikiri restoration site and also the Hunt wetland, so smaller projects.
To clarify, the money did go to Central Hawke's Bay.
So there is a report on Tukituki River.
The Council for Hawke's Bay is not linked to the money given.
All right, would someone like to move that we receive this report if there are no other? I'm sorry, Councilor Dick moved it. Peter, you're seconding? Would you like to comment further? Paul? Any other comments? None? I'll put the motion. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. All right, we are to the agenda item everyone has been waiting for. I believe Councillor Bevan has a slide presentation that he. But would you let the staff present first? All right, okay.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks very much for inviting me to talk about whitebait. It is a passion of mine as well, so sounds like I might have a bit of competition at the table. And I'm not exactly sure what you wanted, but I've got a slideshow put together, so I can go through this, or we could just go through that the agenda item, and if there's questions, we could just do it more informally, like that. Slideshow?
In the slideshow how to whitebait correctly
It's just getting out there and having fun. So as
Those are
long
the
as
only
it-
ones I've seen this year, so I'm quite happy.
Hasn't started yet. So yeah, I guess I think everyone knows there's been a massive decline in whitebait. When you hear about the anecdotes back in the day, so people used to use them as fertiliser, used to be able to use a bucket rather than a net, they were so abundant. But these days it is quite hard to catch a feed, and so people often refer to them as white gold. So they've gone from a very abundant resource to something that's quite scarce and very precious. And most of the talk today will just focus on the potential causes of the decline in abundance. To do that, it's important to understand the species, and there's 5 of them involved in the whitebait species. Some people include smelt. I tend not to, but for most people, it's 5 native Galaxia species which spend part of their time in rivers and part of their time in the ocean. And a lot of whitebaiters still don't know that. So if I do that, you can see my thing, yeah. So inung is the most sort of common, and generally when you're eating a whitebait patty, most of the little fritters are made up of these guys. In Hawke's Bay, we also have reasonable contributions from Kwaro and banded kokapu. So both of those species will get to sort of maybe up to 20 centimetres, so much larger than inanga, which is more like 8 to 10 centimetres. These guys will live in the sort of sluggish streams. Think of the Karamu. This guy will live in, swifter water, more like the Makarora or, the upper reaches where it's quite steep and the water's fast and cooler. And then banded cockapoo is quite rare in Hawke's Bay. It's abundant in other parts of New Zealand, but pretty rare here. The safest place to think you'll catch a banded cockapoo is actually in Tūtera. So there's a landlocked population in Tūtera, the little creeks that run into Tūtera. They tend to be the more cascading, so still steep but less water, and you tend to have more of a trickle than a pool, a trickle than a pool. That's where you get these guys. We don't have giant cockapoo, which is more of a associated with swamps. So same type of position in the landscape as inanga, but tend to be more sort of large swampy type systems. And then short-jaw cockapoo are a strange one, quite infrequently occurring around New Zealand. Hotspots on the west coast, and there's actually quite a few in the Waikato system as well, which is a bit of an oddity. They're probably the most cryptic and least understood of the 5. But yeah, when we're talking about Hawke's Bay, it's these 3, and it's good to remember that although they're all transparent juveniles when you're eating them, they actually go on and turn into these quite different species. And that's important when you're trying to think about the management of the fishery.
Yep. Are any of those species endangered or
threatened? Yeah. Threatened? So 4 out of the 5 have got a at-risk declining classification, which, terminology it's quite particular. You could call that threatened, but we probably would say at-risk declining. So it's not like a kakapo or anything like that, but certainly their numbers have declined, and the data that we do have suggests that they've been declining in the last 10 to 20 years as well. So they're declining, and so that's put them on the risk category. In all cases, there are millions of individuals around New Zealand, and for that reason, because they've got such a large population, the relative risk is less. And inanga and koara are also found in other parts of the world, Australia and sub-Antarctic islands, whereas all of these 3 are only found in New Zealand. So if you're talking about biodiversity, you'd probably put more focus on those ones that are only found in New Zealand. But yeah, the 4 that are, inanga, koara, giants and shortjaws, bandids is the only one that's not on that at-risk declining. And funnily enough, bandids out of our 3 is probably the rarest on the ground. And we don't have either of these.
If you buy some Chinese whitebait, what are you getting?
Don't know, but yeah, Chinese. They're not migratory
right.
galaxias. Yeah, so they're different. So there's whitebait all around the world. It's sort of a generic term for transparent small fish. So there's Mediterranean whitebait, which is actually a marine species, so entirely marine and a very different group of fish. Chinese whitebait, I'm not sure. I've never looked at the package. Yeah. Don't have the subtle taste that gets lost by egg. Anyway, I don't eat whitebait. Oh yeah.
So what can we do?
Yeah, that's right. So before we can work out what to do, I'll just go into a bit more detail and tell me to hurry up if I'm going too slow. But so they're migratory, and so that means they need to use different parts of the landscape at different parts of their life cycle, and in order to manage them, and also to understand why they might not be so many as they used to be, it's important to understand where they need things to be in good condition. So the adults will live in rivers, lakes and wetlands. Inanga is quite well understood, the spawning strategy. They migrate down to estuaries and spawn on a high tide, and the eggs are actually left emergent on the banks. So they're out of water, but in the upper estuary areas. And the other 4 species, they all spawn further away from the estuary, so upstream, but in riparian habitat as well. They don't use the tide to strand their eggs, they use a high flow, so a flood event. So all of them lay their eggs in riparian habitat, and the eggs are out of water during their development. So that makes riparian vegetation obviously quite important. Most of the time, the larvae will drift out to sea after hatching, and so what they do out there is still a real big mystery. I actually did my PhD on that. That's what I'm quite passionate about these guys. But it's still, I was a bit of a failure, wasn't it? Needed more than 3 years. So that's a real mystery. But obviously there are different habitat requirements when they're adults. Whether they've got different habitat requirements, whether they're larvae is unknown. That's a probability though, given the distribution around New Zealand. So there's this big blue. What happens out there? Are we doing anything that's affecting that? The juveniles return to suitable river mouths, so they need access into the river. They need to get past the gauntlet of Councillor Peter and his mates, and then they also need to get access to wherever they want to end up. So they get into the river, and then there'll be different parts of that river network that they need to be able to get
So
to.
can I just ask a question about that before you go to your next slide?
Yeah.
You're saying that they come back in during spring, so they don't actually flow back up the river at all times of the year?
They do. So this will be the peak. So the peak migration for the different species is slightly different. Inanga is usually August, September-ish.
Yeah.
Kawara come in the middle of the season, and then the Kokopu tend to be more later, so November, December. But you do get fresh run whitebait all year round. So yeah, we certainly catch them, but very small numbers. So when you're talking about the peak, that does tend to be spring, and so the whitebait season is generally targeting the peak.
season.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's life history. So in the next few slides, what I've done is tried to focus in on each of these different life stages. So if you think about adults living in rivers and lakes and wetlands, think about all the things that we've done to that particular type of habitat. So we've straightened channels, and I think it's easy to overlook what that actually means. But so this is what a river used to look like. We'll come through, we'll draw a line between here and there, and suddenly you've halved, or even more, a greater reduction in actual habitat area by just straightening the stream. So straight off the mark, channel straightening decreases habitat area, and then it also decreases the quality of that habitat. Same thing with wetland drainage. Kokopu giants and inanga are certainly very abundant in wetlands. When you drain them, less habitat. Woody debris being removed for all good reasons. I'm not trying to pick on asset management here. There's reasons why we've had to do this stuff, but in terms of their habitat, having logs in the river is actually quite a good thing. It provides structure and provides alternate feed sources and that kind of thing. We tend to remove that in certain places. Riparian cover's been removed either deliberately or by fire or whatever, but there's a whole lot less bush around our streams now. Sedimentation's a huge one. It clogs up the places that they would normally live. You've got two rocks rather than having a gap in between those two rocks. It's just a sort of a smothered habitat. Water quality issues, particularly for these guys, it's more around oxygen and temperature. If there's no oxygen, they're going to struggle to respire, and if the water's too hot, they get baked, and then they don't grow as well. And then you've also got introduced species, things like trout, and sometimes those introduced species interact with the habitat quality. So carp and catfish can make the place a bit less
Can I
desirable.
just clarify that? So trout eat these?
So it's not a clear-cut relationship between trout and native fish in general. The one that I've noticed the most direct relationship is Quiro. So Quiro occupy a similar habitat to juvenile trout, and there's a lot of displacement that occurs when you've got trout and Quiro in the same habitat. When you get into the sort of the more inanga category, you'll often it's hard to see relationships there. You'll see trout and inanga living side by side. The trout eat the inanga, there's no doubt about that. The whitebaiters will know that. The fishermen are often alongside them and they'll be using whitebait lures to try to catch the trout because the trout are chasing the whitebait. But in terms of having an effect at the population level and then seeing that in the abundance of the species, inanga and trout don't seem to have a strong relationship. And then banded kokopu is the same deal. Trout and bandeds don't often live in the same types of places. So it's mixed, but with Quiro, pretty strong evidence.
So just another question, Andy. How far up rivers will they go to live and to breed? I mean, is the first kilometre inside a river mouth the most important part of their life cycle, or is it the first 10 kilometres, or what?
So it'll depend on the species again, and it depends on where the good habitat is. So in Hawke's Bay, you tend not to get into that really steep cool water stuff until you've gone quite a ways inland. And so you won't, the Quiro, which prefers that, tend to be a bit further inland. If you've got a coastal creek where you get a bit of hill country, a coastal creek, nice forest, you get straight into that sort of good habitat immediately, and so then the abundance will usually decline as you go inland. So when they see good habitat, they'll occupy it, and the further they have to go to get there, it seems to result in there being less individuals as you go there. But in the Waikato River, so 100 k's inland, you've still got inanga. It's very low gradient. We've got Quiro right up around the Ruataniwha site. There was plenty there. So tens of kilometres if you've got a longer river, over 100 kilometres. But for the whitebait and for the inanga in particularly, that first sort of 30 or 40 kilometres is probably the most relevant, because inanga tend not to penetrate too far inland, and they're also they're the biggest contributor to the whitebait fishery at the moment. I won't go into detail, but the banded Kokapu and Kwaro, if we increase the numbers of them, it would change the whitebait fishery quite a bit. So you'd end up having a more protracted season, and you might have a steadier supply of larvae.
Could I just respond to Peter's question from a slightly different angle? As I understand it, this is what I've been told, is that the most important part of the river for inanga is the tidal stretch, because the female species comes down and at the spring tide lays the eggs on the vegetation around it, and they sit there for the period between the tides, and when the next spring tide comes up, they then drop into the water and go out to sea. So the most important part for the river for them, in my view, is the tidal estuary part. And if I've sent to Annalie a picture of the area around the mouth of the Grey River, which I hope she can put up if she can at the end of your presentation, where they have deliberately gone and replanted all the way around the edges of the lower mouth of the Grey River to build a habitat for the inanga to breed on, and opening up as much as they can the wetlands.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. And the only point I'd make is that, so there's different life stages. So in terms of reproduction, that upper estuary is critical for inanga, because that's where they spawn. But if you've only got a kilometre of good habitat for them, you'll only have a fraction of the population. So rather than having, a million fish go down and spawn in that area, you might only have 1,000.
Sure.
So yeah.
But we have ruined all of the critical area of the river, like first that estuarine area, by draining all the swamps, draining all the wetlands, draining all the estuaries, putting stock onto it. We've just trashed it really.
So in some parts, perhaps, but there's also been quite a bit of work already in Hawke's Bay, which I'll get to, about enhancing that area. So that'll come back in a little bit later, potentially. So so that's the adult habitat. So if we think about that, and then as Councillor Barker, this riparian habitat for inanga, it's the upper estuary. For the other species, it's probably near where they live, and so that actually means it's the entire river network essentially, because the different species occupy the different parts of that entire river network. And so what we've done, again as mentioned, so we've steepened the banks. They tend to prefer a shallow gradient because it's better for spawning, because they need to get in there when the water's there. If it's shallow, it provides more area for them to get in, do their thing, and get out with other large fish not being able to get in there and eat them. So shallow banks is good, a really steep bank not so much. Unstable banks is a problem. If they lay their eggs and it then falls back into the river, or if it's so unstable you never get vegetation established, then that creates issues. The riparian cover is in some cases removed. We do a bit of mowing and spraying. We tend not to in these areas now. We're good. Where I came from in Southland, they were still a bit behind the 8 ball, and that was still going on. Grazing is a big one, so excluding stock from those areas. Some stuff they've done down around Christchurch showed, mortality of eggs was essentially 100% when it was grazed, and it went up to, 100% mortality. And then when you exclude stock, you only have a fraction of that, so less than 10%. So you've increased the survival of those eggs by an order of magnitude. And then sediment is a big one as well, which smothers the eggs. So if you can imagine, after the sort of mini cyclone we had, if you went to the river, you would have noticed like a layer of silt along the edges of the riverbanks. So when that happens during the spawning time, that silt is smothering the eggs that are in that part of the river. So if we can decrease that, that'll mean there's less cases of entire egg clusters being obliterated by these flood events which deposit the sediment. So that's for the egg stage.
The Chair, if I could just intervene at this point. Graham, I just wondered if you could help us with the riverbank mowing along the various, where have we got to with withdrawing from the immediate zone?
Thank you, Councillor. I was actually going to respond to Councillor Barker's sort of comment around the destruction and what have you that's occurred in these lower estuarine areas. So, in terms of Hawke's Bay, we actually led the charge 20 odd years ago, probably 30 years ago, in terms of identifying, in fact, where whitebait habitat and the influence of that was within our Hawke's Bay rivers, both connected with ourselves and Department of Conservation. And there was a belief, and it might be a little bit contrary to some of Andy's comments, is that DOC had spent a good number of years looking further upstream in these systems, and Rick's comment around the tidal estuarine area. It was actually through our gravel management staff at the time that indicated or found, out of probably a similar passion to Peter's as a whitebaiter, that in fact all the activity occurred in those very first few hundred metres rather than kilometres. And so we embarked on a significant retirement program, and they're identified in our GIS layers of all of the estuarine areas of all of our major rivers that are now, significant components of them are fenced off solely and specifically for whitebait habitats, and none of the activities that are referred to around mowing and sort of the maintenance type activities occur in those estuarine areas. And in the response to that, as Andy said, in terms of fairly minor works, and our experience was around the fact it was simply the fescue grasses. If you allowed those to grow, they were a phenomenal habitat for both the laying of the eggs, and we have photos of what they call the milk, which is where the males fertilise the eggs in the water, and the water is simply white. So, and again, not contrary to Andy, but I know that Hans Rook from DOC said that there's a significant period that occurs outside the whitebait season, and I thought it was about now, sort of April, that they'd identified, not many years ago, that was a significant period. It was outside the whitebait season, which was a good opportunity or recovery period for what occurs. So rest assured, we've been involved in a significant retirement element. We invested a significant amount of money in fencing, and found that simply leaving the environment to do its own thing in that particularly that tidal estuarine area has been massively successful.
And just on that, because one thing that is interesting is planting trees in those areas isn't necessarily a good idea, because it shades out the grasses that the inanga seem to prefer, or at least where the eggs seem to have their best survival. And so we do need to be quite clever with regards to planting around those inanga spawning areas as well, for that reason. But yeah, I'll come back to the some of the stuff that's been done in Hawke's Bay, because when I was doing this stuff, Hawke's Bay was the area that I came to get the information, and the guidelines for identifying spawning grounds. A lot of that was based on work by Rookie here. So it is a good place to be in terms of whitebait restoration. So that was the spawning. And then, yes, I mentioned the larval requirements are really poorly understood, but what is quite well understood is that the way they feed, they're quite visual, so they need to be able to see the food that they're eating. And if they're ingesting things that are about the same size as what they're eating, then they get all sorts of internal issues and they die. So the growth rate and mortality of larvae is heavily influenced by turbidity. So every time this happens, and when our bay stays turbid, that means that the bay is not going to be as good a larval rearing habitat as it would be if it was clear. And that's quite clear. What it means in terms of numbers is harder to say, but the more we can do to decrease sediment coming down our rivers and into the ocean, the better it will be for the larval stages that are out there feeding in the ocean. And then we've got the juveniles returning to suitable river mouths. So I was going to put a photo of river mouth closure and opening is quite an interesting one, because if it occurs at the wrong time of year, you are actually, even if it's natural, you are actually blocking the fish getting back into the rivers. And so, timing that around the expected pulses of these guys, it does make sense. In spring, it does tend to be open because, you've got a bit more flow going down, but not always and not everywhere. And what these guys do in terms of population effects is quite poorly understood. I outlined in the paper we don't really collect information to know, and that limits what we can say. Some studies they have done, they've dyed whitebait, put them downstream and then gone upstream and see how many they could recatch. And that showed that about 30% were getting through. 30% were being taken. But that was in quite a large river, and it was very variable. So there's a lot of uncertainty. But I think most people you talk to would say that the habitat influences are probably the overriding factor in comparison to the whitebaiting. But the guys who do get upset, it tends to be around those people catching tons and tons and then selling it. So that relative balance between recreational and commercial components.
From Councillor Bevan's personal reports, whitebaiting itself is no threat whatsoever.
Well, if you use it, sorry, what's that phrase? Yeah, it's actually shooing them around the nets, maybe. Yeah, No, there's this, in conservation biology, there's a phrase, you use it or lose it. So if you're using a resource, you're far more inclined to take care of it. So whitebaiting may indirectly be helping the fishery because it means that people care about and do what they can to increase the numbers. And then we've got accessing different parts of the waterway. So barriers to migration are a big thing. So if you talk about habitat quality, we might be able to increase the carrying capacity, so do things that mean you can have twice as many fish in the river. But if they can't even get there, then you've got zero fish rather than... So these barriers to migration are a huge influence, and that's another priority for council. So in terms of what's caused the whitebait decline, it really is take your pick. There's all sorts of things. The different species might be affected by different aspects of those pressures. So rather than trying to work out what's going on, I thought I'd just touch on what HBRC can do and already are doing or have done. So
Before we do that,
Yep.
the reason why I raised this question was I know that it's only anecdotal because nobody can measure the volume of fish that are taken on an annual basis out of the rivers here in Hawke's Bay, but because I've been fishing for an awfully long time, I absolutely know that it's much harder to catch whitebait on any given day than it was 20 or 30 years ago, and it's much harder to get a significant catch. So I know over time there's been a significant decline in the population, but last year was an unmitigated disaster, and that's why I raised it, because I didn't know whether it was because of particular climate factors that had changed the timing that the whitebait came up the river, or whether there was something else that had happened. I mean, what I'm talking about is, and it's not just me, because you talk to other people that are down there, it's the same for them. There were only 2 days last year when people got any sort of a significant catch in the Tukituk River. And in any normal year, like the year before, there might have been 10 or 15 days. So this is a significant change last year compared with previous years. And I was hoping that you might be able to pinpoint something that had caused it, because it was like us dropping off a precipice the last season. But you're not indicating that there was anything of that nature.
Look, I haven't looked into it in too much detail in terms of what was so special about last year. I know we had a really early bloom, like the rivers were warmer than usual early on, and we got a lot more algae in the river. I don't know that would have, like off the top of my head, I wouldn't really expect that to have affected the numbers of whitebait coming in. I'd need to go back, and often you get a bit of a correlation between timing of floods. So if the floods come through when the eggs are on the banks, then the following year you'll have a poor strike. The ocean temperature's been doing a funny thing, so that may have affected the larval survival. So I'd be thinking if it was isolated to last year, we should be looking at the egg production and the larval survival, and that would be quite a difficult thing to do, I think. And I guess I'd ask, so talking to Rookie after, because there was a lot of work done, it was so that report on the bottom left there, after that they went through and they did a lot of fencing, which is what Gans was talking about. And since that time, my understanding was that the whitebaiters on the river, I don't know whether it was the Tuki, I thought it included the Tuki, in terms of the whitebaiters' comments, they've actually seen an increase. So for the last 10 or 20 years, so maybe the last 10 years, more whitebait than there were from 30 to 20 years ago. And so one thing that we could do, which I think would be a good thing for council to do, is actually try to tap into that asset. People like yourself and others who have got a good long history, actually try to quantify the memories. Ideally, people will keep diaries, and so then we'd have numbers in a piece of paper we could look at. But just trying to understand what's going on, because it's extremely difficult to answer questions like that because we don't have any data at all, and no one's really collecting that data at the moment. So whether it's our job or not, you could talk about it as a state of the environment thing. So you could also say, hey, look, docs should be doing it, or somebody else. But yeah, that would be something that would help us start to answer those kinds of questions. And I don't mean any disrespect, but at the moment I've got, there weren't any last year, but does that mean that's compared to the previous 2 years or the previous 5 years? Is that just a memory? Because often the way brains work is you forget the bad things 20 or 30 years ago and you remember the good things, and in the last 3 or 4 years you remember the bad things. So it's that, what do you call it, the rose-tinted glasses kind of effect. And so actually knowing with,
It's a specific count of the number of bags in my freezer.
yeah.
Can
Do you keep a track of that?
Some of this colloquy needs to be taken offline here. We're running
Yeah,
out of
sure.
time here.
Yeah,
James, did you have something to say?
Oh, look, just very, very quickly, Chair, I note the reference on the slide to the strong focus of the LTP. We had a public meeting in Taradale Town Hall last night, and a member of the community, a farmer, made the assertion that there was not a scientific basis to our proposed interventions in the long-term plan, and expressed reservations about the value of what we were doing, to the point of suggesting that in 10 years' time we'll look back and have wasted an awful lot of money. I'm just wondering if you can make any comment about whether there is a scientific basis to our proposals to increase riparian fencing, planting and erosion control.
In terms of being able to say there'll be 30% more whitebait, I wouldn't be able to do anything like that. But first principles. So we refer to sediment as a master stressor, and that, like, if you pick any one particular pollutant or contaminant or whatever you want to call it, sediment usually sits at the top of the list. It has the biggest and most pervasive impact on ecosystems. So whatever we do to reduce sediment getting into the waterways has got to be a good thing. And our monitoring will show exactly what that turns into. Maybe not being able to pinpoint particular activities, but overall, in terms of the general push, we'll be in a position to be able to say, hopefully, that things have gotten 20% better or 50% better. But yeah, in terms of being the riparian habitat, so yeah, again, it's impossible to refute that that'll have a good benefit to the fish communities, but being able to say we'll have 10 times as many fish or 3 times as many fish, difficult to do that. And that's not from wouldn't be from a lack of trying, it's just a lack of information. So yeah, we'll be in a better position to answer that question, which isn't going to help convince people now, but we'll be in a better position to answer it with 10 or 20 years of doing stuff and then monitoring the effects of it.
I would welcome a motion.
Well, I'm happy to move any motion like, but I've already got a seconder, that we received the report and thank the staff for it. I don't think we've got any particular actions to come out of it, but I would make the observation. I see that the riparian habitat up there, and I've sent Annalie a photo of what they've done at the bottom of the Grey River.
Yep.
And was looking at whether we were able to do something similar here with the, for example, at Waitangi.
Am I meant to be doing this, or Annalie?
Sorry.
Oh, is that it there? Maybe I'm getting...
And as part of our no, that's me on. Go
back to that one.
No, there's another one. There's another one there.
He told us he was working that day.
Yeah, see this one here? They've planted all this out here on the mouth of the Grey River, specifically to provide a habitat for spawning whitebait. It's been a conscious, deliberate plan. I've got a lot of other pictures of it. And I thought it used to be a desolate grey area in there, but it looks great now. And I was wondering, could we do something similar? We're doing our thing... Just inside the mouth? Just inside the mouth, yeah. It's entirely tidal, all floods up and down. And I see we've got some works going on in Waitangi. Could we, at the same time we're doing the restoration there, make a sort of an Inanga whitebait breeding ground as part of our ordinary works of restoration? I mean, it's
Councillor, I could show you a photo of the Tukituk estuary that should look exactly the same as a result of the planting and the retirement we've done there on both sides of the river that looks exactly like that. So we have sections of that already. Your point's well made about doing more of it.
But then we've got the Waitangi, we've dug some little holes
yeah.
and things. Are we going to do that there too?
Yep.
Great.
Yep. So, like I say, in that instance there, our experience has been simply the fescue grass has been the most productive species for actual spawning habitat. Just a couple of things around that, Mr. Chairman, if I can, is we issue licence to occupy, so just as aware as being the scheme owners that whitebaiters have exclusive rights for the lower sections of the right, so they actually rent a space. It's a religion in terms of who has what space and rules and regulations around that. Probably just reflecting Peter's comment and Andy's around whitebaiters would probably be the most secretive people I know, and some of the biggest exaggerators or liars that I know. But we do have a delegates process in place around all of our major rivers, and in fact they have probably more than anecdotal information and feedback about what occurs on each of those rivers. And it's interesting on a year-by-year basis how one river may perform poorly, but rest assured, for example, the Tuki was poor, the Clive River was a very effective fishery. So sort of the secretiveness and the variability are two significant issues we've dealt with over the years.
Councillor Curtin.
Well, I'm assuming we're in debate, Mr. Chair, so following on from the...
All right.
Thank you, Chair. Look, thank you for the presentation. It appears to me that, one, we've done a whole bunch of stuff already to work on the whitebait habitat. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff through the long-term plan, which should also contribute to that. But the other question that raises for the third part of that, which raises for me, is this thing about the commercial take of whitebait versus obviously there's recreational take, but it's the unregulated commercial take, and whether that is something we could perhaps be writing to DOC or requesting to DOC, whether that would be useful to say, look, you guys need to perhaps reconsider putting some sort of quotas around this or some sort of regulation around it, because it seems like every time they back away from it, right? So, and it's not about knocking off the recreational users. It's about the guys who are making an awful lot of money out of us and saying, every other fishery's got some sort of quota, so why not this one?
Whether you could apply some local rules, but rest assured the West Coast South Island whitebait industry is the one that drives the hottest topics associated with whitebait. We have different seasonal dates on those, so whether we can have some local rules, but certainly any involvement we've had in the past, the big influences and the big issues are associated with the South Island rivers, and changing rules or amending rules is a challenging space.
Oh, no, absolutely. I don't think it's something we can do, but in terms of, do you think it would be worthwhile or for us to write to would look after it?
Department of Conservation.
System?
Yeah, Department of Conservation manage it at the moment, but if it was to be introduced in the quota management system, it would obviously come under the Fisheries Act. So you might like to have discussions with the member for Napier.
I may do that, yeah. Watch them go grey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All jokes aside, and well done for Councillor Bevan for tabling this issue, and even though it might sound trite and on the margins, the reality is that I think we should start at this point looking at the species and the impacts that we're having on them, and if we do that, we've almost got the default for the subsequent remediations that take place. So I'd like to see a range of species examined in a similar way, brought to the table and be the start point of our discussions on what we do. The example that Graham sort of alluded to was, okay, what impact on the council activities as a consequence of this? So we've had examples, we've had the straightening of the rivers, which we've done, from the early days. Maybe we don't take such drastic steps anymore. Our operations and clearing waterways, similarly, we've got this retreating approach. So what's happened is consideration of the biodiversity, considerations of the species that we're trying to protect, in fact, drive decision making. So well done. I'm sure you want to hear that, so that your scientific effort has a significant impact on the operations of council right across the board. So please come back and see us soon and present the next species for consideration.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I take we're in debate, are we?
I guess so.
I guess so. Look, again, thanks, Andy, for the presentation. I know that the discussion we've had this afternoon has been a little bit, it would appear a little bit jovial if you were watching it on the video, but I think that demonstrates how passionate people sitting around this table are about this particular fishery, and how much, and also reflects the public's interest in the whitebait, because everyone seems to enjoy them. But I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we imagine that we weren't taking it seriously, because I think this is something that we need to be looking at seriously and keeping an eye on. So thank you for the report.
And the last word goes to Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report, Andy. This is a serious matter. It really can. And the reason, as I said, that I brought this forward was because last year it was a disaster for a lot of whitebaiters, and if this happens 2 seasons in a row, we've got some serious problems that we need to deal with. And it just looks to me like management of this particular species has fallen into a bit of a hole, and DOC appears to be reluctant to do anything, although there are some management tools available. For instance, you could shorten the whitebait season, you could limit the catch that people are allowed to take and so forth. So there are some levers that could be taken, but in the absence of evidence, it's going to be pretty hard to convince DOC to do anything, and that's going to be the issue. So I think it's quite important that you spend this winter developing some possible tools that will give you a little bit more information about what's happening this coming whitebait season, and maybe if we can get some sort of a report back at the end of it on what's happened, it might get our attention and cause us to think pretty seriously about what we can do to better manage the species in this region. So thank you.
Okay. Any others? Then I will put.
I'm just saying thank you for an outstanding report, really good. And I know the whitebait aren't essentially a core issue for the regional council, but it is one of the part. We are here to make sure the environment's really well, and if the environment's not right, well, the fish will go. And if we can restore our fisheries, well, then we're doing something right in the environment. So I think it's a really good package, and I like to see the enthusiasm of staff for these subjects. It's just lovely to see. Thank you.
Councillor West.
Could we have a copy, email a copy of that, Prezzo, please? Yeah.
Okay, I'll take the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
We've got staff waiting to help us through item 10. Could we deal with that before you break for lunch?
No objection?
Shouldn't take
Fine.
long.
Okay, that's fine. This is the cycleway, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll perhaps introduce by way of just a few words. Vicky Butterworth's here, our cycleway network coordinator, and myself and Vicky and a couple of other members of the team have been dealing with this particular issue, which is specifically in relation to our current Hawke's Bay Trails network. So I sort of wanted to just set a bit of the scene around, I suppose, challenges we've had of recent times around cycle-related or walking trails within Hawke's Bay, and particularly within the Tuki area. But to just reinforce that this particular issue is a health and safety issue on our existing cycle network as part of the landscapes ride that I was involved in some years ago in terms of the bidding and construction of what is Hawke's Bay Trails. So Vicky and I specifically, or particularly, have been working on this issue for probably close to 6 months now, I think, Vicky. Looking at solutions to a particular issue that evolved out of the construction of the cycleways. We were looking for off-road options as part of the construction of the cycleway from River Road to Red Bridge as part of the original proposal, and challenges with landowners at the time around getting access to private property adjacent to the Tuki River. So what we ended up with was a section that's been referred to as the Mad Mile over the last few years since construction, and the challenges in terms of both access, use and safety of a section broadly between River Road and Craigie Range Winery as you go up and over the hill on the Waimarama Road. So our challenge has been to look for or find better solutions that we've got at the moment, which is an on-road section that had some design elements added to it, with an intention of making it as safe as possible. Our experience or expertise over that time has been that it hasn't really achieved that, both in terms of a safety aspect and its use. And between ourselves and particularly Hastings District Council as the two primary bodies involved, we've been looking for solutions associated with that. This paper talks to the specific section referred to as the Mad Mile associated with our particular interest, but obviously allied and associated with HDC. So Vicky, I don't know whether you want to pick it up from there and talk about the proposal as such and where we've got to.
So good afternoon. So just going from there, I'll take it as you've actually read this report. I'll just highlight a few things, just go over what Graham has actually covered. So this, when the Hawke's Bay Trails were initially created, this was one section that we've had an issue with gaining access in order to keep it consistent with our New Zealand Cycle Trail, which has a grade status of grade 1 to 3, we say, but essentially most of our trails are grade 1 to 2. This section is out of context, I suppose, with the rest of our network and with our trail users, and as such, when we put our trail users onto that section, it's deemed as dangerous. As a result of that, New Zealand Cycle Trail actually wanted us to actually remove this whole section from our network. We had it temporarily removed while we've tried to find a solution. Now this, back in 2015, HDC actually produced a report outlining some various options. Probably about 18 months ago, we actually looked at doing a river option and removing this section of trail, but after looking into the feasibility of it, we realised it was going to be a lot bigger bridge than we actually anticipated, and as such costs were going to be significantly ramped up. So we went back to the drawing board and looked at all the options again. Of those options, the one that has become the most favourable option for us to pursue is actually to do an off-road trail adjacent to the road. Essentially it would be road reserve, but we're actually removing the cyclist off the road and having a essentially grade separated section of them to actually ride. Midday and New Zealand Cycle Trail are in support of that, I suppose at this stage is what I would say. It is the preferred option. They've actually allocated funding as a priority project. This is a safety issue for them. So as a priority project, they've actually allocated half the funding towards this project. The rest of the funding we have found through Hawke's Bay Regional Council, Eastern and Central Community Trust and HDC. So we have funding allocated for it, and at this stage we think we can complete this project in a reasonable manner at a reasonable cost.
So the point of this paper, as it states in point 19, is to confirm various players that this is all happening, and the reference includes iwi. So what is the iwi awareness and view of this?
I'll comment on that.
Like I say, perhaps I can just introduce the specific nature of Section 19. So at the moment we have a deal on the table with the associated landowner on this component of the Mad Mile. As stated, we have a detailed sale and purchase offer with all the conditions agreed. We have a design and we have all the plans associated with what we're trying to achieve. As part of finalising that particular arrangement or deal, the landowner has asked that we provide some evidence of awareness, and it's a specific word, so hence I've written it in there. It wasn't necessarily an approval. This was, and it was associated with acknowledging that we are looking at an arrangement to solve this particular problem, and a nervousness around, I suppose, what I've referred to earlier on there in the Craggy Range Trail is that issues that were played out in the media or blindsided within the media were a concern as to either confusion between the two trails or that I suppose the knowledge or understanding of this trail wasn't either highlighted or understood enough, obviously at the council table before it got into any media context. So as part of that deal, he had 3 or 4 questions of me, and one of them was that there is some acknowledgement by way of an email, if necessary, to show that the awareness of this particular problem and trail had hit the tables of HPRC, HGC and local iwi. So I suppose our connection with that was obviously a discussion with our chairman around dealing with those three particular issues coincidentally, and perhaps Rex from there if you'd like to pick up your element of it.
So on this particular issue, yeah, there was, just want to reiterate that because our cycle track got mixed up in the emotions of the Craggy Range track, which walked up the side of Tomato Peak. And of course it had nothing to do with it. So everyone just got nervous because of the emotions around that. Landowners got nervous and everyone got nervous. So subsequently, landowner, as Graham pointed out, wanted to make sure that everyone knew about it, because in that previous one, there was various parties said they didn't know anything about it. And so everyone thought that they did. So they wanted to be absolutely sure. So I took the following actions. Firstly, I went out and saw Robert McDonald at Waimarama, and spent a couple of hours, really pleasant hours with him, talked about a whole lot of issues and talked about this track. I took a map out, he has no concerns. So from the Waimarama marae, or hapu, I also spoke to the chair of the iwi on this, and he had no concerns. He thought it was a good idea. And subsequently I wrote a letter to all the councillors, including this council, and the Hastings District Council, giving them a map, outlining them, saying this is what we intend to do, and I have only received one reply to that, and that was this is a good idea reply. I also spoke to the Mayor of Hastings District, had 3 or 4 meetings with her just to ensure that we had their support, because of course, as you can see, part of this track is they're responsible for. I'm not sure of their negotiations. I heard that they were still talking to one particular landowner. That's yet to be finalised, but from our perspective, all of our requirements are done, and there is no objections to date.
Mr. Chairman, I assume that this has been approved by the Regional Cycling Governance Group?
Thank you, Councillor Dick. Yes, back in 2015 with the Regional Cycling Plan, that was actually part of it and one of the requirements that we wanted to do to improve the safety. So yes, they're well aware of it and behind it. Thank you.
I think, Mr. Chairman, everyone's done particularly well, including the Chairman, and I'd just like to congratulate everyone involved with sorting this out, and in particular securing the funding. I think you've done very well.
Yeah, oh no, it's
We'll speak on this. At this table, I note this is going to be a limestone path. What I see on that road, and I see it every day, is that no one uses the limestone path that presently runs from Craggy Range down the hill. Occasionally there will be what I call a fat wheel bike on that path, and what one will more often see are people on the roadway because they don't want to use the limestone path. So frankly, I don't think this will actually take people off the Mad Mile. I think the folks who make that trek will stay on the road, and unless we put up physical barriers and radar police and whatever, that's what the situation is going to continue to be. But go for it.
Do I have a chance to speak, Chair?
Yes, sure.
Just as a counter to that, that's probably certainly true with some of those speed cyclists who prefer to stay on the road. But at least now they have an alternative, And if they do get run over, because there are, and I walked that road, and there are parts that are so narrow you can't get 2 cars plus a cyclist. So it is extremely dangerous. And they will be aware that they don't have to go on it. There will be a new track. And another point I'd like to make is Vicky did drag me up that track in my English brogues, which was quite difficult at the time. Made her walk in front because I was slipping and sliding all over the place. But one of the things that was really obvious was the views is quite sensational. This will be, even though it's just a little bit off the road, at times it may be 5 metres, the views were sensational, and I think people and families will use it because it now connects. They weren't going to go there before. So I'm hopeful that you're wrong, and that this does attract families on bikes. And
I think it will do that. What I don't think it will do is keep the other folks off.
the speed cyclists, I tend to agree.
Yeah, I will make a comment, Chair. I'd just like to say that, you know, contrary to recent media commentary around how much we love Hawke's Bay tourism here in Hawke's Bay around this table, this finishes off a really great feature, which will be, you know, from all reports that I've read through the Cycling Governance Group, is about the tourism trail and the use of tourists and being able to do that whole loop about down both sides of the Tukitoki River. So, you know, we are supporting the tourism industry in Hawke's Bay.